Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Many Tribes, One Kingdom. It's your friend Dustin here with my wonderful and most intellectual co-host.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm most intellectual, but hey, it's John.
Hey, I'm just trying to give you a compliment because that's who you are.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining us again for another wonderful video. Today, we are going to be talking about Israel's oppression and then eventual redemption and exodus from Egypt. Stay tuned. All right. Thank you guys for staying with us. As I said before, we are going to be focusing on Israel's time and eventual exodus from Egypt. Whew.
Yes.
It
The
is such a long story, but we hopefully won't take up so much time for you guys today.
yes, it's what I like to call the Exodus experience. Not that funny, but okay.
So
And
a lot of this is going to be paraphrased, but we will give you the scriptural references. So if you want to go read these events in more detail, you're more than welcome to do so. In fact, we encourage you to do so in case we missed any important details.
yes. So the first thing we really need to talk about, because I think a lot of people, at least when I was a kid, I didn't really put two and two together. I always knew that, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, but I never understood how they got there.
Oh yeah, it
So
never
that
really
wasn't until I read
explained.
the Bible. Huh?
It never really explained. I'm thinking like in my mind, I was thinking, okay, so the Egyptians went into Israel, captured the land, and took all the people. That was my thinking before I read this is when I was a young age, so I didn't know all was going to take place.
I never even thought about it. Like, I never really thought about how they got there. I just took it for granted that they were there.
Mm,
So, in order to talk about that, we're just going to briefly summarize the latter half of Genesis. As you know, Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 12 sons, and that's really where we start.
yes, but technically
So,
Jacob had 13 sons.
no, he had 12 sons. He had a daughter.
Benjamin.
Benjamin was the 12th.
Oh,
You're,
wow.
you're
I was
You're
just,
mixing up Manasseh and Ephraim. They were sons of Joseph.
yeah, I'm sorry, guys.
But speaking
Oh,
of
wow.
Joseph, he's really where the story starts. So as you know, Joseph was his father's favorite, and his brothers grew very jealous of him. And so to retaliate, they sold their brother into slavery. Jeez.
Yeah,
Makes my
that's kind of
makes my
escalating things.
makes my family squabbles look tame in comparison. Wow.
Oh, wow. Cool.
We never sold anybody. There were some fistfights at family reunions, but selling people into slavery seems a little excessive.
And the wonderful part about this, what was occurring here, that God never stopped having his hand on the situation. He had a grand plan, even if some pieces had to be moved around, things had to
Mm-hmm.
change slightly. It was still his plan. He was still orchestrating everything. Joseph
Yes,
was given visions and dreams, and that's what brought him into the situation that he was in. He was saying that he was going to be the head over all the other brothers, even though he was at this point the youngest. And so Joseph was considered a favorite of his father because he felt like he was blessed. It was blessing from God. And so he gave him a coat of many colors, and then yeah, he was thrown into a well, and all the brothers decided to sell him into slavery.
yes. But it's honestly that incident in slavery. If you don't know, he was sold into Egypt. That's where the slavers sold him. And God used Joseph in this to prepare the land because a great famine was coming. So God sent 7 years of blessing and then 7 years of famine. And through some incidents that we really won't go into detail here because they're not significant to the story that we're talking about today, Joseph ended up interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and telling him how to prepare to save the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And
oh, sorry.
also,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then his brothers in the land of Canaan ended up coming down to actually buy food from him. Joseph has his family brought to Egypt. He forgives his brothers, and they live in Egypt as Pharaoh's shepherds.
Absolutely. And then at this point, obviously the Israelites were multiplying, and families grew and grew and grew to such a great number. And this leads up to the events in Exodus, which lead to the original oppression of the Israelites in Egypt. But John has so graciously offered to read this first portion of Exodus for us.
Yes. So if you want to follow along, open up to Exodus chapter 1. We'll start with verse 6 and go through verse 14. And as always, I'll be reading from the New American Standard Bible. All right. Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly, and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land." So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor, and they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. The Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks, and at all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. So this is honestly kind of sad. I mean, the whole reason Egypt survived and even became as prosperous as it had is because the sons of Israel.
Not even just the sons of Israel, but just everybody there. Because it wasn't just them who were. I mean, after the famine was over, I'm sure that the Israelites, in their great number, would help the Egyptians farm the land and help grow more crops, gather more cattle. I'm sure that there was some help given. I'm sure that the Israelites were not just like a leech on the system. They were there because in their mindset, they came together to survive this great famine. And so that brought them even closer together as family. So this kind of treatment kind of felt like being stabbed in the back. They still had their cultural identity. Like they still knew, like, oh, he's Israelite, or he's the son of Israel, and he's Egyptian. So there was this distinctions made, but there was a family atmosphere. And John, how would you feel if someone you consider family stabbed you in the back for no reason apparent to you?
I would be incredibly hurt. I mean, Joseph saved Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have, the Pharaoh of this dynasty come in and just say, "Hey, thanks for giving us all that help. By the way, we're going to enslave your people now. And if you try to fight us, we'll kill you." And just real fast, because it's a common misconception, the Hebrew slaves did not build the pyramids. The pyramids were already built by this time in history.
Yes.
That's a common misconception that I've heard so many people say, and I just want to inform you that is not the case. The Israelites had nothing to do with the pyramids. And honestly, I won't read it, but it gets even worse after that, because then Pharaoh starts trying to wipe out the Israelites. He tells he tells his soldiers and he tells the midwives, hey, when they give birth, if it's a boy, I want you to go ahead and kill it. But if it's a girl, she can live, which that implies that Pharaoh was going to raise these girls to essentially become wives or slaves of a certain kind, which I'm not allowed to say on YouTube.
Ladies of the night.
Yes, forced ladies of the night. And Pharaoh had no problem raising these girls to fulfill that service. So not only did they enslave them, but they murdered them and they defiled them, and it's honestly just despicable behavior.
They crushed them, persecuted everything that they could. In an attempt, and all this came about because Pharaoh was concerned about the growing number of Israelites was slowly outnumbering his own people, which led to the subjugation of Israel, which led to the infanticide led by Pharaoh and his troops.
Yes.
And God was, he was, I can see God in this moment storing up his anger against Egypt for doing this against his own people, even though it wasn't even just Joseph, it was God himself who saved Egypt from the 7 years of famine. He could have said, you know what, no, you guys, you're not my people, so I ain't going to help you. You guys worship other gods, I'm not going to help you. But no, God was gracious, and he sent his people so that way they can receive the blessing on top of it.
Mm-hmm. And it allowed Egypt to become a major world superpower at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. If you go back in history to the 2nd century or 2nd millennium BC and look at, the historical data, Egypt was one of the big heavy hitters of the time. And that's all because of what God did through the Israelites. And then Pharaoh just turned around and did all this. And the sad thing is, honestly, if Pharaoh had just treated the Israelites properly, one, he had nothing to fear from them. They didn't want the Egyptians' land. And two, they could have been part of the blessing that God bestowed on Israel. If you go back to Genesis 12, God says that anyone who blesses Abraham's descendants, he will bless.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then we start getting into this moment where Moses was born.
Yes.
Moses, obviously, since he was a boy, and the ordinance to kill all male babies still given, there was concern by his mother. I'm dying to try. I think Jochebed. I hope I did not put it.
Jochebed. The CH makes a different sound in Hebrew. It's Jochebed.
Jochebed. Okay. Well, Jochebed, which is Moses' mother, made a very heart-wrenching decision. As a mother and a parent to the newborn child, she was concerned for her child's welfare, but also she was scared to give up her own child. But she understood that, she prayed. She understood that God's plan was greater. She understood that God was going to. She prayed God's blessing over him, that he would be protected, and she threw him into the lake, or put him in a basket and pushed him down the Nile for his protection. Yes. Which was, only by the grace of God that Pharaoh's own daughter found him in the reeds and took him as his own. Took him as her own. Wow, I can't speak to that. I'm sorry. Took Moses as, her own son. And not even just that, she even got Jochebed to be, the nursing mother, or the nursing mother, the caretaker of Moses. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, God, this is so how we could take it in our own lives, that we don't see how God's going to work. Jochebed did not know what was going to happen to Moses after he was born, but she was brought right back into his life out of miraculous, because God is just so wonderful. I'm sorry, I'm getting choked up over here.
I kind of have to take a little bit of a second to kind of, there's an incident here that kind of makes me chuckle, in that, Moses' sister Miriam was the one who, went and got Jochebed and brought her to Pharaoh's daughter and said, hey, here's a woman who can nurse the baby you just found. So I kind of have to chuckle a little bit, like, she knew what she was doing. And it just reminds me of that scene from The Prince of Egypt. That opening scene always gets me to tear up a little bit.
Mm.
Great movie. Go watch it. Um,
Yeah, I would recommend it. I can't remember, you can watch this. Things on Peacock.
it's on Peacock.
Yeah.
So Moses is raised in the royal family of Egypt. Now, he probably wasn't in line to become Pharaoh himself. However, he was still a important figure in the royal family
Mhm.
until one day when he sees a Hebrew slave being viciously beaten by by the Egyptians. Wow. Okay, now I can't speak. Thanks, Dustin.
I'm sorry. Yeah, and something just like woke up in Moses at this point, like seeing, because he understands that he knew he was Hebrew, and so when he sees
Yes.
one of his own people being beat, everything that he was ever taught by the royal family sort of like got swept under the rug or swept away from him. And he just like he went into full action. It's like, you're not doing this to my people. Stop beating him. And he goes out and murders the Egyptian that did it. And after Pharaoh finds out, he flees the city.
Yes, Pharaoh wants to have him killed,
Oh, absolutely.
which is crazy to think about. This is a man who cared so little about people's lives. He had no problem killing babies,
Mhm.
and yet he is ready to kill what is essentially his grandson just because he killed someone who was viciously beating a slave to death.
Right. It just shows you the view that this Pharaoh had of that the Israelites, but the Hebrew people. He saw them as less than the cattle, less than the very animal that service him.
Yes.
And so,
So Moses disappears off the scene for about 40 years. He gets married, he has a family, but that's not important to our story, so we're just going to gloss over it until God meets Moses in the famous burning bush.
just to also say that he fled to Midian. So we
Oh,
kind of
yes, yes.
so we kind of get an area about where he would be when the burning bush took place.
Well, I don't have a map, so, and I don't actually know where exactly Midian would be. I know it's on the Arabian Peninsula, but I don't
I,
know exactly where it's
I
at.
think it was like a few hundred miles east of Egypt.
Tell you what, if one of you knows where Midian is, let us know down in the comments. And at this point, Moses is serving as a shepherd. You know,
Okay, hold on real quick. I'm sorry.
good.
Moses fled for safety and became a shepherd in Midian, a region several hundred miles east of Egypt on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay. I find it
Uh,
interesting. I find it interesting the parallels here between Moses and Jesus, royalty to shepherd. Both Moses and later Jesus go through the same transformation from being royalty to serving as a shepherd.
mhm.
And it's also a reversal of what happens to David. David starts as a shepherd and becomes royalty. Moses starts as royalty and becomes a shepherd. I just like looking at these parallels throughout the scriptures. So in the burning bush, God appears to Moses and he tells him that he's going to send him back to Egypt with different signs and miracles to perform to bring the Israelite people together and to bring them out from under the Egyptians. Now, God could easily have just struck the Egyptians down. He could have given the Israelites the ability to overthrow them, but he wanted to show, I still see a modicum of mercy from God, even during the incident with the plagues. He could have easily just jumped straight to plague number 10 and not bothered with the other 9, but he still gave Egypt time to let the people go.
He did, but he also was doing something else. In short, each of the plagues was to represent a defeat of another one of the Egyptian gods.
Mm-hmm. And
God if you want to read,
some,
if you want to learn more about this, go ahead and read Exodus. I think it's what chapters 4 through 9 or 4 through 12. Sorry.
well, Moses' commissioning comes in Exodus 3, so read Exodus 3 through 11. Chapter 12 is when we arrive at the famous last plague, the Passover. And
Yes.
I want you to consider this for a second. All the horrible things that the Egyptians had done to the Israelites. And God could easily have just wiped out all of Egypt, but he decided to return the Egyptians blood for blood. The Egyptians decided to wipe out all the baby boys born to the Israelites, so God decided that he would wipe out their firstborn sons.
Which, if you don't know, back then, the firstborn son often would inherit a large portion of the estate.
Yeah. Well, the firstborn son was also, he was your heir. He was your, in Pharaoh's instance, his firstborn son would have been the person who inherited the throne after him.
Right.
But my point is, God, in his mercy, I want you to notice something. God gave the Israelites a way out. And if the Egyptians had been paying attention, like if they had seen the power of God, they could have followed the Israelites in sacrificing the Passover lamb and painting their doors with the blood. But in Pharaoh's arrogance, he genuinely believed he could withstand God. I just bumped my camera. Pharaoh genuinely believed that he was a god. And God decided to show him, you are not a god, you are a man, and you are a weak man. Every time I read this story, I really want some lamb.
You too.
Yes, me too.
So we get to the point to where all the Egyptians are, wow, Egyptians. Dang it, John. All the Israelites paint the threshold of their door with the blood of firstborn lamb, unblemished. I should say, unblemished lamb.
Yes.
It signified to the angel of death that this is the household of Israel, or descendants of Israel's household. Passover, it's not a household you're going to go after. And
Yes.
so it signaled to them, to the angel of death, hit the Egyptians, they're their household. It was an easy way for the angel of death to determine which one was which. But often we also got to remember that there's always had to be a sacrifice. There always has to be blood for blood, or blood for God's wrath. Like Israel, sins of Israel was still, I believe at this point they did fall away slightly.
They will
not entirely, I should say. They didn't trust in God. I should say.
No, they didn't, and we'll see that in just a second. But the other thing that I find interesting is that God also says, and you can read this in Exodus 12, that when he passes through the land of Egypt and kills the firstborn sons of all the Egyptians, he also says he's going to execute judgment on the gods of Egypt.
Mm.
So I find that to be a very interesting thing. And that's one thing that, like, for the longest time, I just didn't understand. And if you know anything about what I believe that the pagan gods are the fallen angels, and that there are certain ones that basically divided up the earth after Babel, took, their own portions, and God was punishing those who had become the Egyptian gods.
Yes. So this scene takes place overnight, and no household was spared. Even Pharaoh's household, again, John pointed that out earlier. Pharaoh believed that he was God and he could withstand God's authority and power. And pretty much he just said, no, you can't, and he took the life of his son.
Yes.
And sort of told Pharaoh, and kind of won. Pharaoh was very defeated at this point because he's like, not only did nothing he could do stop anything, he lost the very heir that was supposed to replace him, essentially requiring him to have to find a new heir.
Well, not only that, but also Egypt was destroyed economically at this point. The plagues of locust and hail had completely destroyed all of the Egyptians' crops. The hail would have destroyed their homes. The animals were sick and dying. The people had boils and lice and flies all over the place. And it was just not it's interesting because at this point is when Egypt actually starts to decline as a world superpower.
Hmm.
And just so you know, the pharaoh of the Exodus was most likely Amenhotep II, not Ramses, even though everyone seems to think it's Ramses. I don't honestly know why.
Correct.
Like it, I've seen a couple of movies based on the Exodus, like Ten Commandments and Prince of Egypt, and they both say that it was Ramses. And I'm like, it was Amenhotep. I'm sorry. That's just one of my pet peeves.
Well, I mean, and it's an honest one to have because if you're going to provide information about historical event, you want to be as accurate as possible.
Absolutely. Ramses II didn't come on scene until 2 centuries after Moses.
Yes. And after this whole horrific event occurred, Pharaoh Amenhotep calls in Moses, which, if you guys need to realize one thing, these two grew up together. So
Mm-hmm.
this was like very deep in each other. Like Moses had to forsake everything he grew up with, the person he grew up with, and follow
Mm-hmm.
God to lead his people out of the oppression they were in. Now Amenhotep had to be the righteous leader of Egypt and try
Which,
to, represent them the best he could. But honestly, a defeated state, because all the plagues that had occurred, like John said, it defeated the economy, destroyed the economy practically, diminished any capacity to kind of recover from this, and would take
mm-hmm.
long periods to recover from this. And so Amenhotep had no other choice but to let Israel go so that Egypt can sort of heal from this kind of attack. And so Moses begins to flee, or takes his people, and they leave Egypt. The
Yep.
Exodus, the grand Exodus from Egypt. And as
Yes.
they approach the Red Sea, Pharaoh has a change of heart and begins to chase after them with every chariot, every horse, every man he has left to bring them back.
You know, Even as a kid, when I was reading this, I was like, is he stupid? I'm like, he just saw everything that happened. What did he think this was going to accomplish?
Well, you got to remember, his heart was hardened, so he's in that case, he was set in his ways. He I mean, when you're in great grief, you kind of will agree to just do about anything to sort of
Mm-hmm.
alleviate the pain. And so the source of the pain was Israel and their God. So it's like, what's the best way to alleviate their pain is to get rid of them. But then when he came to his senses, like, how can I let these people go when our economy is destroyed? We're going to need their slave labor to sort of restore Egypt to any kind of standing on the world stage. And
Well,
so, go ahead, sorry.
the other thing is that, like, you have to understand about Pharaoh is that he was steeped in sin, and sin will harden your heart. The more you sin, the more you want to sin. So I almost think of it at this point as almost like an addiction. He couldn't help him. I mean, I'm not making excuses for Pharaoh. I'm not making excuses for him. But the point is, he couldn't help himself. He had to do this. Again, not making excuses, and he absolutely gets what he deserves in this moment.
Yes. So Moses calls out to God to help his people flee, and God tells Moses to put his staff in the water. As he does so, the waters, which I love, the Prince of Egypt. I think they did a really good job. I think they made it really, really epic on how the sea just split open. But pretty much that's what happened. This sea sort of split open enough for his people to go through, and it wasn't a small amount of people. We got to remember, Israel practically outnumbered Egypt, even though a lot of the children were wiped out. They still were in great numbers.
They were almost a million strong at this point. They had 600,000 men, and that doesn't include the women and the children.
Absolutely. And not even to mention, not including the census, but the cattle and livestock that they would have had too.
Mm-hmm. And
And
so
so they get to the other side, and as if two great walls come slamming together, the ocean comes and crashes over the Egyptians and Pharaoh, killing them. And I would like to note that I know researchers or scientists have found um, horse bones, chariot remains in the Red Sea where this would have taken place, as well as they found a wind that happens every 1,000 years or a couple thousand years that is powerful enough to actually split the sea.
Yes. But I kind of want to go back a little because you're kind of rushing through this, and this is a very powerful
Oh,
moment.
I'm just going to overview. Let's analyze it.
Moses, the people see the Egyptians coming and they cry out and they blame Moses. They say, hey, you brought us out here to kill us. And that's what I said earlier. They didn't have enough trust in God because they immediately think, well, here come the Egyptians. We're dead. And God basically tells Moses, why are you complaining to me? God's basically just like, stand back and watch me work.
Cracks his knuckles.
Huh?
I say he cracks his knuckles.
Yeah. And he tells Moses, he's like, stretch your hand over the water. So Moses stands with his hand over the water, and the wind comes and divides the sea, making, walls of water on either side for the Israelites to walk through. And they walk through, and as Pharaoh is sending his chariots, which were basically the tanks of that day, he's sending his chariots down into the sea basin after the Israelites. And God throws the Egyptians into confusion. And if you know anything about a war or about an army, confusion is the last thing you want. The chariots get stuck. The Egyptians are trying to abandon them. The Israelites finish crossing, and God brings the water back down, killing almost the entire Egyptian army. Now, records do indicate that Pharaoh did survive because, as all cowards do, he was in the back.
And sorry, go ahead.
And Josephus, the historian, if you know anything about him, because you may be wondering, hey, where did the Israelites get all their weapons after this? Because, they start going to war with the Amorites and the Canaanites after this. Josephus notes that God caused the sea to wash the weapons from the Egyptian army ashore for the Israelites. Ooh, I got hyped up just now.
And I just want to back up a little bit.
Okay.
How stupid do you have to be to send your chariots in the middle of a sea that the God of Israel split? How stupid do you have to be to not think maybe he's going to cause it to crash down on us the moment we enter into where the water is? Because, the Israelites are far ahead of us. At this point, like John said, he's steeped in sin. He loses focus. And that's another detriment to any commanders to lose focus of the battle.
Yes.
He's not understanding that, wait a minute, this is the God of Israel. We need to stop our force because if we lose any more troops, we can't last against another enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, not only did Amenhotep make a critical failure in this, he essentially just crippled the entire military of Egypt by doing this whole thing and pulling the stunt.
It's so interesting. The very thing that his father was wanting to avoid when he said, hey, Israel could unite with our enemies and they could destroy us. The very thing that his father wanted to avoid, Amenhotep ended up causing.
Yeah, that guy should have listened to his father a little more.
Well, no, he shouldn't have listened to his father. No, his father was the one who ordered them to kill the children.
No, I mean, and paid attention to that part, maybe not give Israel the upper hand.
Yeah, but,
not, maybe treat them a little bit more fairly, not, cause the wrath of God to come down on him.
The story of the Exodus is both it's a sad and tragic tale as well as a tale of hope and new beginning. It's sad and tragic because Egypt had seen God's power. They had seen it in the life of Joseph. They had seen it in all the ways that Moses had worked. They'd seen what God could do, and yet they refused to listen. And, some people will say, well, why did God punish Egypt for what Pharaoh did? Well, I would like to point out, as powerful as Pharaoh was, if enough people had united against him in Egypt and said, hey, Pharaoh, knock it off, or, we're going to depose you and put someone else in charge, then they could have done so. They chose to follow Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And it's also a tale of hope and new beginnings. This is the beginning of the Israelite year, God tells them. This is a beginning of a new era in human history, because until that point, God had never had a nation of his own, a nation of people who would serve him, who would follow him, and who would represent him to the pagan nations around them. He had servants like Abraham, but he never had a whole nation of people dedicated to him.
I do want to point something out here.
Hmm.
Very critical. This is a story of freedom.
Yes.
Freedom from oppression, freedom from Egypt, freedom from what was going on there.
Yes.
God did not bring them out of Egypt for the promised land, get them to the promised land. God brought them out of Egypt so that they can freely worship him.
Yes.
If their minds were focused on going to the promised land, then that will become their focus. It will become their God, in a sense. But when he directs Moses, like, they're going to come out and they're going to worship. Is this going to lead you to the promised land? Absolutely. I will guide you to the promised land. But your goal, your responsibility is to direct worship, to have the people worship, because it was to help them avoid the mistakes that Egypt had made. To lose focus on the person who got them out of where they were. To focus on the blessings that God can and will bring to Israel if they obey him, if they worship, if they take notice of what he's trying to do.
And then they fail horribly.
Dun, dun, dun.
But that's not really what we're here to talk about. If you want to know more about that, read the rest of Exodus and the rest of the Old Testament.
Read the whole Bible.
Read the whole Bible. Well, yeah, that's a great idea. Read the whole Bible. So, the story of the Exodus, it's one that I've been very familiar with it. It's a tradition in my family. My dad always turns on the Ten Commandments every year around Passover and Easter. And I love The Prince of Egypt. It's one of my favorite movies. I remember showing it to my brother, and he loved it as well. So that's a special thing that he and I share.
And John was also the one who recommended it to me, because I had never seen The Prince of Egypt. I never even heard about this movie until I was like 22 or 23. I'd never heard of this movie before. Yeah. John got me to watch it, and I have to agree, it is the most epic movie I've ever seen. Were there errors? Were there mistakes made in this movie? Some information that was wrong? Absolutely. But
well, yeah, I doubt Moses was singing while the plagues were coming.
And I doubt the Pharaoh in the beginning was Patrick Stewart, or a son of Patrick Stewart.
But it's a very good movie, and I would recommend it if you want to explain the Exodus to your children. Then show them that. I would also recommend you watch the Ten Commandments. That came out in like the 50s or 60s. It's a really old movie.
Yes.
And it's really long, too. It's like 3 hours long, I think.
Ooh.
Yeah, enjoy.
But yes, this month, all of our major videos are going to focus on a freedom theme, because as we had recently celebrated, not even 4 days ago, or by the time you watch this, 5 days ago, it was July 4th, the celebration of the United States' freedom, essential birth, coming out of the oppression, coming out of the religious persecution of Great Britain, becoming their own nation so that they can be free, truly, truly free, and giving birth to one of the earliest and probably oldest democracies. Or not the oldest, I correct that. Probably to one of the most successful democracies.
Yes. But we're here to hype up America. Let's remember who the real person who gives freedom is, and that's God.
Absolutely. God orchestrated and guided all things to occur.
Yeah. So we want you guys to realize that there is freedom in God. I've had some people tell me, I'll say this real fast and then I'll stop. I've had some people tell me, I don't want to follow God because he's so restrictive. I don't feel free. And I've responded to them, I have never felt more free than I have since I've started following God.
There is hope. All of what happened to, when God brought him out of Egypt, like John said, it was opportunity for hope, opportunity of freedom. That is what the same freedom that Israel felt from from coming out of under the foot of Egypt is the same way you're going to feel when you're out from under the foot of sin, out of under the foot of evil, darkness, the devil, you name it. If it was evil, he's going to get you out of it. There is freedom in that. Now, are we human? Are we still going to sin? Are we still going to fall into temptation? Unfortunately, yes, that is the case. But so long as you're choosing to follow God, so long as you're choosing to allow the Holy Spirit to work in your life, so long as you're obeying his ordinances, there will be freedom. And because, one day you're going to walk through those great and pearly gates and hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. For your many years of service, for your many years of worshiping me and bringing my message to the people, may now enter into paradise.
There's a song, I don't remember its title, but the chorus says, "Who the sun sets free is free indeed," which is also a verse. There is a verse in the Bible, and that's the truth. Jesus Christ provides us forgiveness and freedom in God.
Hallelujah.
Amen. That's all I've got.
I think it'll be really good if we ended off this video with a prayer.
I think it would.
All right. If you'll bow your heads with me. Lord Jesus, I thank you so much for the freedom that you have offered us, that you paid with your own blood. Thank you for satisfying the wrath of God, of your Father, the things we did. Thank you for bearing our punishment to offer us the same freedom that Israel felt after coming out of Egypt, out of that oppression. I pray, Lord, that right now that you would send the people, your people out to open the eyes of those who have covered their eyes with sin, who no longer see a way out, who no longer see the problem with sin. Lord, I just ask that you open their eyes to what you have to offer. Break that heart of stone and turn it into a pound of flesh. Enter in. Make a new person out of them. Use us, Lord, your holiness. Use us to bring your message. To give us the courage to go forward into this mighty battle. Start to bring your hope, your message to all people. That they would know you, that they would know freedom, that they would know hope, that they would know peace, and more importantly, Lord, that they would come to know who you are. Thank you so much for what you are preparing to do with our lives. Lord, I ask that you just use us for your will. And it's in your name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today and watching this, this wonderful video that didn't always go as planned or didn't go all on track, but eventually came to the core message. Thank you so much for joining with us. And please stay tuned this month. As I said, this is our Freedom Month. We want to celebrate that by giving you stories of freedom from oppression throughout the whole Bible. Have a great day, guys, and God bless you.